father was born March 28th, 1927 in Oradea, Romania. He had one other brother, an older brother, and they always lived with the grandmother, his maternal I think it's the paternal grandmother. So when my uncle was, or my dad was 11 years old, his father died, unfortunately, in a terrible train accident. He worked for the railroad, and he was killed. So Charlie, my dad's brother, was 19 at the time, 20 years old. He was already working in Ukraine in a labor camp. So my father now was the man of the house. So it was his grandmother, his mother, and himself. So how do you find a way to make a living? So what they did is they used to put nuts and bolts together, thousands and thousands of little pieces, and he earned money that way. So my father learned very early on in his life that, you have to work to make a living. And unfortunately, at 11 years old, it was a very, very hard lesson to learn. So I personally think that right there was the start of him at 11 years old having to become an adult. And I think that really kind of started it. So when the war broke out and he was taken, I think that's such a precedent to him that as soon as it was done, he would have to find a way to support himself. He didn't know about his mother. His grandmother had already passed away. So I think that had a big influence, in his life, that his father unfortunately passed away when he was very young. Yeah. So my dad had a brother that died. My dad was 9 years old when he died. And the little brother was 12, 13 years old, and he died of a stomach ailment. We really don't know what it was. And my dad said that he was never the same. So every Sunday they would go to the cemetery to see his grave and all the other family members in the cemetery. So, and I think later on in life, as you well know, my father would go to the cemetery daily to see his wife, my mom, that was buried in the cemetery, in Cleveland. And he would go every single day. And also, starting, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, my father would try to go every other year back to Romania with either myself, my husband, my sister, my children, back to Romania just to go to the cemetery to see his family.
I remember that. I remember how proud he was that you would go with the family, would go with him. And I think that was it your daughter that discovered a family member's resting place, and remembering correctly?
Yes. So what happened is I don't know the years, maybe 10 years ago, we had gone to the cemetery again. And unfortunately, the Jewish part of the cemetery is sectioned off by a 25, 30-foot concrete wall. And they do have caretakers, but the caretakers don't really take care of, unfortunately, the graves of the Jewish people. So my father always knew what row they were in. And even though the caretakers had a ledger where all the graves were, we couldn't find it. So my daughter stood up on a grave and looked through the woods and saw a headstone. We couldn't read it at the time, but she found it. And these caretakers then said, why don't you come back tomorrow and we will clear out all the debris so we can see if that really is a member of your family. And sure enough, it was. So because of my daughter, she happened to find my father's brother that died very early on of a stomach ailment of some sort.
Wow. I remember how proud he was when he shared that story with us.
Oh my God. I'll tell you, we used to go and we used to try to pull the weeds. I can't even explain to you how desperate my father was to find his brother. I mean, desperate. and how Leah, just standing on a grave, was able to look beyond, and I don't know, divine intervention, whatever it was, she was able to locate the grave.
We say bashert, and your dad would say 1 in a million, right?
Yes,
that's
my
what he
father
said all
with
the time.
1 in a million. Right.
1 in a million. Your father
Right.
had 1 in a million every day. With every story, he had such a bashert in his life.
I know.
Life like 1 in a million.
Yes, he was funny when it came to that, because he always thought that there was some sort of divine intervention, because so many things in his life would be 1 in a million. And how can that be that there's so many 1 in a millions when there really, there isn't? So
it's unbelievable. Yeah, like the time that he went back, he signed up for the army, which is, like you said, you mentioned that, I think, or someone, it was just so overwhelming, his appreciation. He signs up for the army, and of all places, the army sends him back to Germany. And in Germany, his officer says to him, Bernath, are you related to somebody here named Charlie? Am I remembering correctly?
So
and he says,
yes. So what happened was my dad, when he was liberated, and a year later, he was able to come to the United States through one of the Jewish organizations called Joint. And he learned English, and all he wanted to do was to give back to the country that adopted him. So he enlisted in the American Army. It took him 3 times, but he got in. And where did they send him? Back to Germany. So he worked right alongside, he thought he worked right alongside as probably some former SS Gestapo, but, he would never say anything. And he was talking, he went to, I guess, a colonel or whatever, ended up talking to him, told him to come into his office. And he said, your last name is Bernath, right? Yes. Do you have a relative that's here? Went through all his papers and saw that his brother Charlie and his wife were on a list waiting and waiting and waiting to come to the US. He took out the paper, stamped it, and said, okay, they're on the next boat to the United States. So there you go again.
Unbelievable.
My father, again, with the 1 in a million chance that would happen.
1 in a million.
1 in a million.
Amazing. Now, one of the questions we had was to ask you for unique experiences that he had during the time of the period of the Holocaust that you think maybe made him look upon his situation differently. So what were his experiences, and maybe particular experiences? Sometimes he would share with us stories here at Menorah Park. He had the experience, he found that the unimaginable horror, it actually made some people more deeply religious, he said. And then he saw that it took some people who had been religious, like he said, he knew a priest that had terrible gangrene. I don't know if you remember that, but
he laid down, right. So in the barracks, they would have, 4 people to a bed, to a twin bed. I mean, they were all in a row and they were bunks. So he was laying next to a priest that had gangrene. And he just wanted to be put out of his misery because he was just in so much agony. And my father asked him, do you still believe in God? And he said, no, God would do this. And my father said, absolutely not. There is a God. There will be a way out of it. And I think what my father relates that to is, I'm not sure which month it was, which camp he was in. I think he was in the last camp he was in Ebensee. There were guard towers everywhere. So he was working by one of the guard towers, and all of a sudden, a brown paper bag dropped in front of him. And he was afraid that if he looked up, the guard would shoot me. If he opened the package, the guard would shoot me. So what he decided to do is take a try, and he picked up the package. He went behind a building, opened it up, and sure enough, it was the guard's lunch. So it was a piece of meat in between 2 pieces, or a piece of meat in between 2 pieces of bread. And he did that for about a week or 2, that he would go to the same place every day, and the guard would drop his lunch to him. So his feeling was, not everybody is a monster. And I think
Yeah, I remember him
that
telling us.
kind of opened up his eyes to the fact that not everybody there was there for the purpose of killing people. And that I think that happened.
She was a vibrant presence on our campus as well.
She
What was it? Yeah, she really was. What was it about volunteering at Menorah Park that made it so exciting for your father to be part of the campus?
Well, I think the whole thing started even before my mother even got to the campus too. So my father and my mother would go there every single day and would help feed her. My mother would help feed her. And my dad just kind of sat there. So he thought, in the dining room.
Educational piece for Holocaust education. In what ways is it special? And what do you think it can give students that a regular video testimony cannot?
Well, I think that the girl, Heather, who came up with this idea, it was basically, she realized that in 10, 15, 20 years, there won't be any survivors left. And they feel that Holocaust education is so important because it teaches you about hate. And as my father said, that word hate is like a parasite invading your brain. And unfortunately, it's like this today because there is so much hate and so much anger in the world. And I think that Heather just wanted to make sure that people during World War II that were part of the Shoah, were in the camps, can give their history, because that's what it is. It's history about what happened to them. So when they approached my dad to do the hologram, they explained to us what's going to happen. They asked my father, I don't know, close to, I guess, 1,000 questions. And what you do is you can interact with him, which is really a wonderful, wonderful way to communicate with the survivor instead of just listening to a video that goes on and on and on. You don't do that. What you do is you just hit a button and you ask the survivor a question pertaining to, his life, either before the war, during the war, after the war. And all the questions that they ask survivors that did this, right now there's probably close to 20 people in the world because they've done it also from people that are also in Europe. And what it does, it gives people a sense that the person is there, just like you and I talking. It's the same kind of technology, except what they do, if you are in Cleveland, the video, or I should say the answers are in California. So it goes through a machine. Technology today is unbelievable. So you could just hit the button and just say, hello, Stanley, how are you? My father would go, I'm fine, thank you. And how are you? That was a question that they would pose to my dad. So it was an unbelievable experience to be there, to watch it happen. It was very time consuming, but my dad was very excited to not only tell his story, but to make sure that nobody ever, ever forgets the Holocaust.
Right, yeah. So it's a certain Warmkeit, I think in Yiddish, a certain warmth in that kind of education that lacks in a video or just a documentary.
Right. Because in a documentary, sometimes with high school kids and even middle school kids who he used to go to speak to, they were so, you could hear a pin drop. That's how quiet it was. I must have listened to my father, I don't know, 40, 50 times, going all across the Cleveland area, and also in where my sister lives in Utah. And he spoke in Cincinnati. He spoke all over about the experience, and to watch the reaction of the people, whether they were young adults, whether they were older adults, whether they were children, it didn't matter. They were mesmerized by him, wanting to touch him. Right. They wanted his autograph when it was over. It just, especially if kids today are learning about the Holocaust. But the most important thing that he wanted to teach are three things: Number one, never give up. Number two, believe in yourself. And number three, nobody is better than I, and I'm not better than anybody else, just different.
That's right. Thank you. Many, many times we heard those very same three things that were so important to Stanley to share. So in closing, Vera, first, of course, we thank you so much for participating, you and Lisa both, for being such a vibrant part of our campus at Menorah Park, where your family's presence is still felt, and of course, so much, really. So in closing, I would ask you, what would your father, Stanley Bernath's message be to us today as we struggle to cope with so many new challenges and new problems in the world? There's old problems still exist, new problems coming up. What would Stanley's message be to us today?
I think my father always had a very positive attitude towards life. And he always used to say, if you can't do anything about it, don't worry about it. And I think people right now in this day and age, with all the hate that's going on in the world, it would upset my father so greatly to be so upset about all the hate that is going on, whether it's with the African American community, the Asian community, any minority, what's happening at the border, with people that are of Spanish descent. It's so sad. Yeah. And I think my father would be he would be very angry about all that. And I don't think if there's anything that he could have really done about it, except speak more about his experience, to see that unfortunately this is happening all over again, except it's happening in the United States and we're not in a camp.
Right. And we need to do our best to spread love and tolerance.
Absolutely. Tolerance. I think is the perfect word to describe what my father would say right now, would be tolerant. You have to be tolerant of others. Right.
Well, again, thank you so very, very much.
Oh, you're so very welcome.
And the Joint helped him. The organization that initially got him out of Europe was through the United States. It was through the armed services, and they were sponsoring kids under 18 and under. So my dad did a little faking on his age by 1 year.
Okay.
And got into that. A lot of people did that. And you did whatever you had to do.
Yeah.
So he didn't hurt anybody. So he came to New York and decided that he wanted to join the American Army. He wanted to join the U.S. Army. And it was so important to him to repay this country for taking him and adopting him. And but he didn't know English and he couldn't pass the test. So they sent he and his friend to Wisconsin for 6 months to learn English and to make money. So he would work. He would work at night and study during the day. Still couldn't pass the test for the Army. Went back to New York 3 times. On the 3rd time, he passed the test and joined the American Army. So that's how he got to the United States, and that's how he. It was one thing to another. And I'm sure there were people that were Eastern European that spoke Hungarian and Romanian, and everybody was helping everybody to try to assimilate and adapt, to their new surroundings. He wanted to get out of Europe. He had no love for the people who turned him in and turned their backs on him and didn't protect him. And so there was no love lost. He wanted to leave and start a new life somewhere else.
I see. Wasn't he scared of what would happen in the Army? I mean, it was a very serious decision. I mean, or he just didn't think that way, that he could be sent into combat and he could be.
When you talk about fear, living through what he lived through, you get pretty fearless.
Yeah.
Some people, not everybody. People came out of it continually fearful. And I understand why. And you never know, who are you? How would you be surviving this?
Yes.
What would be the outcome for you? before, during, and after. And so for him, I think he got through difficult times knowing what he had been through in his life and that he can get through anything. So I don't think he thought about that. He just
Really?
plowed through.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so like his being in the army helped him, was a step towards building a family, finding your mother.
He found my mother right before I think he was already in boot camp.
Okay.
So there's a photo of him with my mom, and it's the only time he has no mustache.
Oh.
Once he was liberated and in the United States, that's the only time he's ever been without a mustache his whole life. During boot camp in Fort Dix in New Jersey.
So the mustache was like a symbol of, I don't know, his American identity or his freedom or
maybe.
Whatever.
He looked a little like David Niven when he was young.
Okay.
The actor.
Uh-huh.
So he met my mom, but going into the army was, he said, the best 4 years of his life.
Yeah.
He had food and shelter, and he learned English so well that you could barely tell he had ever was from another country. He spoke really well.
Really?
And he had experiences. He got to go skiing because he was stationed in Germany. It didn't bother him.
I mean, did he have an anger or hatred towards Germans and Nazis? Was it sort of like getting them back, or is it just very focused on the United States mission?
Never. He felt hate. Hate was like a poison invading your brain. He wasn't revengeful. When they were liberated, a lot of prisoners were revengeful and killed.
Yeah.
Guards, and he said he didn't want to be involved in that. And I was so happy to hear that, because that's a tough one. These people starved them to death, and that says a lot about his character. Right? And his values, you asked in the beginning, and his values, and maybe he did get that from his mother. I don't know, because my grandmother didn't speak English.
But like, I think maybe your sister would have said it, but like he was able to see people who were good in the Shoah. He saw Nazi soldiers who dropped food to him, and he saw people who weren't so into the cause. And amazing enough, like that was enough for him to not judge everybody, to have just a few good souls. And that teaches me so much about perspective in life situations.
Right, of course. And I think that the story with the meat between the pieces of bread that the guard dropped for him gave him faith in humanity, and that not everybody is a monster, is what he would say. And so I think that helped shape his attitude toward people, and that you can't profile and assume everyone is the same. Not all Germans were SS, and they weren't all guards, and some did help. And so, but you could lose perspective easily when you're starving to death. So for him to draw on that and use that for his life as life lessons, and even though there were times when he would lose that perspective, just in the busyness of trying to make, earn a living and raising a family, and getting through a country that isn't where he was born. There were times where he would lose it. He's not perfect by any means. But I think definitely later in his life, he drew more, especially as he would speak. And I think having to talk about it made him think more about it, right?
Yeah, sure. So you're saying that he had so much time to process and kind of be his best self and present a philosophy of life, that the more he spoke about it, the more he became empowered by it and charged by it. Right.
And was able to influence others in a good way when he understood himself more. He became very introspective. He started reading books on behavior and understanding yourself. And I was really proud of him. That was so outside of anything I would ever expect him to do. Never say never about somebody. And he softened as he got older and wanted to understand others. And he had to understand himself first before he could understand others and help others.
He must have met other survivors who were not able to process things like he did. He probably saw the ones who were bitter and angry and upset. Is there any special way that he dealt with them? That he probably knew he couldn't change them?
You're right. He couldn't, but he was judgmental.
Yeah.
And I think he didn't know how to help them. And he would say, he would be frustrated.
I see.
And he would say he had very good friends who just couldn't get past it. And he and I would have these conversations about it because everyone had a different experience. This one friend watched his parents be murdered. That's a hard one to get over. And so everyone has a different way of dealing with their experience and moving on. And even though the friend moved on, there were certain things this guy could not get past. And my dad was not very tolerant of it.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what I'm saying, is not a perfect person.
Right.
He just wanted them to feel like he felt.
Yeah. He almost like felt for them, like they're missing out on this perspective on life. If only they had it, they could be happy like me. And he wanted to give it to them so badly, but he couldn't change what their emotions and what they had been through.
Exactly. First 25 years after the war, he didn't talk about it. His friends didn't talk about it. They didn't tell my sister and I about it. Nothing. We knew nothing. He didn't want that to define him. He just wanted to move on. And so his reading and interest in other people's experiences during the Holocaust didn't come until much, much later. And he was also very, how do I want to put this? He was so excited about teaching his own experience that he didn't want to hear about anyone else's experience.
I love that.
I know. And he couldn't separate it really.
Right.
So,
that's amazing. And I guess that's kind of a good segue to the next question, which is that he focused very much on teaching the Holocaust to other people. And it seemed like he wanted to reach the whole world. I mean, like he wanted to not just have a few people, he wanted thousands and millions perhaps in his audience. So I guess that's one of my questions, is that he was a successful business person and he probably could have continued in that vein, but why did he move towards education? And especially, why did he want to teach people who would not be affected by the Holocaust, who wouldn't really live with Jews and wouldn't have a role in the Jewish community? Why did it matter so much?
He knew they wouldn't know much about that time period. And he knew that there were a lot of people in the world who denied it. And that bothered him a lot, Holocaust deniers. And when he first started speaking for the first time, he didn't know what kind of an impact he would have. His niece, who was in high school, it was probably 30 years ago, asked him to speak at her school. And the school had Jews and non-Jews. It was a secular high school. And he would talk about just his experience, and people would start asking questions, and the reaction was so overwhelming to him. He loved it. And the teachers wanted him to continue. So they would invite him each year. Then he got on a list, some kind of a list. And as he would wind down his work life, his business life, he had more opportunity to speak. And then he was asked by different organizations to speak at adult organizations, whether it was teachers who were teaching kids. They wanted to know more about his experience. And then it got to church groups. And so I think when you ask that question about why is it important, like people who are not Jewish, he knew they would know nothing about it. They weren't clouded by their own family's experiences. it was something they knew nothing about, and they were so interested. First, he didn't think they would pay attention. And so he was pleasantly surprised and honored and emotional. They wanted to touch him. They sent letters of thanks. He would cry when he would get these letters, these thank you letters, explaining how his experience impacted them, these little kids. And that's what the turning point was for him, was to see in writing these letters from these kids, what his experience and his message, how it helped them.
So it wasn't so much like the historical descriptions, you know, he would tell about the concentration camps, but the part that grabbed them was, this is a real human being who went through all of this, and he's smiling, he's positive, he's, you know, lived his life.
Yes.
Like that was the part that they were hungry for.
Like a hero. They wanted to touch him like a hero. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They made sure he was real. It was fascinating to watch the almost like a transformation, because you'd see kids who, you know, they don't want to be at a lecture with this old guy, and you could see their body language, and you'd watch during the hour and a half, watch the transformation of children in particular, who couldn't wait to raise their hand, who couldn't wait to talk to him, would stand in line afterwards just to get close to him. It was very impactful.
You were saying that how you really have enjoyed, you know, taking your father's stories and going sort of, so to speak, to the next level, genealogical research and historical research, and like, it must feel really good that you are furthering this cause that your father began.
I promised him I would be the torchbearer. I'm going to try not to cry.
Okay. We can't see tears on Zoom, don't worry.
I know. Well, you'll hear it in my voice. I promised him. I knew it was very important. And he knew he wasn't going to live forever.
Wow.
Yeah.
So basically, when I asked you to do this thing, like, I knew you would say yes, because you made a deal with your dad that any promotional opportunities would be accepted.
Oh, he would be thrilled. And I know I believe in souls, and he's always around. There's always some little thing where I go, all right, I know you're here. I can feel it. My dad would always say, if I can just touch one person with my story, if I can affect one person, it was all worth it. Because that person then tells someone else, who tells someone else, who tells someone else. And that was the point.
Wow.
For so long. And so he became just by being there. He was volunteering on his own. He wasn't a technical volunteer, but they said, I think at some point they said, if you're going to be here all this time and you're going to spend time with these people, we need to make you an official volunteer.
I see. Okay. Because
you can't just come and go and touch people and do, you know, there are rules. And so he got a badge, and that made him feel more official, and it expanded. He started going, you know, when my mom was in Helen's place.
And now Rabbi Kirsch, you just encountered Rabbi Kirsch in the hallway, or did they have a common connection?
My dad would wheel people to services.
Okay. So Rabbi Kirsch enjoyed that service, and they were.
So I think they developed a connection while my dad was helping people.
I see. Okay.
Rabbi Kirsch was also helping people to get to the chapel.
I see.
And so he would keep running into him, and then Rabbi Kirsch convinced him to do Torah study.
Oh, okay.
For a year, and they went through every mitzvot, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
613.
Just the two of them?
The two of them.
Wow. So they finished all the mitzvahs in the Torah, so. So what did your father say about that? I can't believe I've been studying with a rabbi for a whole year, you know?
Well, in the beginning, it was exciting and he loved it.
Yeah.
But halfway through, it was a struggle for my dad. That was enough, but he made a commitment. He made a commitment.
Yeah.
And my dad liked the ones that he could relate to in today's world.
Okay.
The ones that were very biblical, that were, he couldn't figure out the You know, how do I relate to this? He didn't have as much patience for.
Right. Uh-huh.
But
He asked the rabbi a lot of questions on those. But the ones about loving your fellow man, and you know, the ones about doing charity and kindness, you know, were things that were natural, and it gave
yes,
purpose to what he was doing already.
absolutely. And I don't think my dad ever did that in his life, you know, studied the Torah like that.
Yeah.
But he did get to read from the Torah when we were in Romania.
Oh yeah.
The technology came up to do this interview with the USC Dimensions and Testimony. He didn't understand what it was. I didn't understand what it was. They came to Cleveland and showed him a video of someone who had done this interview using this advanced 3D, three-dimensional technology. And so he understood more about what he would have to do if they would approve of him. And so they had to go through this interview to make sure, there were several of them, just talk to him for an hour to make sure that he was capable of, he was 90.
Yeah.
We're 88, 89. So he would have had to sit for long periods of time. He would be asked the same question over and over again, just in little different ways, because that was part of the technology. The technology would have to learn how he spoke and how he would answer and words he would use. And so this was part of the technology. And he passed, of course.
Okay.
And they brought him to Los Angeles. And I was there, and Vera was there. And he did great. He wasn't afraid of it. They kept saying, do you need more time? Do you need to take a break? No, I don't need a break.
Yeah.
It brought out this almost like an adrenaline that made him feel strong and powerful and useful.
Okay.
He wanted to be useful.
Yeah. I mean, what it like, it's so like, I don't know, it's amazing. On one hand, like this older man and telling stories from an older world, but it's like the latest technology, hundreds of cameras and whatever, holograms and, you know, and special computer intelligence. I mean, like he must have just loved being in the middle of these two worlds, you know, having comfort in both somehow.
Yes, exactly. Talk about these worlds coming together, and he is the link.
Yeah.
Right?
Like my story is so relevant and so eternal that these, you know, these modern young people at USC, you know, need me to be their, you know, their medium.
Yes, exactly.
So you're saying he's sitting in this chair, and it's like, what was it like? It was hundreds of cameras, lots of lights, you know.
It's a dome that have these connectors, so you can see through the dome, and it's huge. It's about maybe 20 feet in diameter, and you can stand up in it. And there's a chair on a platform. And the reason he has to sit still, so there would be a break every hour, because they have to put it together, splice it together, so it looks like he's there for however long, when he's not really there, when it's just the image of him.
I see.
Yes, so they mark where his hands are and his feet are before he can get up, and then they put him back there when they're ready to film again.
Amazing.
And he has to do this for 3 days.
And the idea is that it's supposed to be like almost like Alexa, where you ask Alexa any question and she answers. It's sort of like you want to feel like you're having a real natural conversation, and it'll respond to your actual questions.
But it has to learn. It has to be trained. And that's the interesting part of the technology. So part of it is that it's three-dimensional. So this dome with the cameras all the way around, that's the technology that allows it to be all the way three-dimensional. Loved the idea that after he's not alive and he's gone, that this will continue, this question and answer connection would continue, because he knew that's the part that was the most impactful. And even though testimonies are impactful, it's more you're listening to someone for an hour speaking. This is an interaction. And that's why USC did this.
I see. Wow. So it's like the person is the key factor, and this was as close as you could get to a person being there,
someone who lived it, and the communication with the other person to have a conversation. And so that's the part they knew would be lost if they didn't do something like this.
Wow, that's really like what would his message be to us today? Like I'm sure we would ask him, like there's a lot of similarities between the Holocaust and COVID. There's a lot of differences as well. But what could you teach us about having the strength and tenacity, to deal with what we're going through today?
I thought about that. I have one line. I mean, I can say a lot about it, but he would say, if you can't do anything about it, don't worry about it.
Your time. It was beautiful talking with you, and we hope this will be another one of the many things you guys have done to perpetuate your father's memory and to encourage the world with his story. And we don't know why the Holocaust happened. Remains a huge question. But when we can give it positivity and meaning and purpose, that does give us a special kind of comfort. That's really meaningful.
And we know it can happen again, and so it's really important to keep communicating these stories of witnesses, people who, bore witness, unfortunately, but were able to tell their stories. So that's what's really important.